Hi everybody, Emma Murphy here, disordered eating specialist, psychotherapist and trainer in the area of emotional eating and binge eating disorder. And this series of videos is designed to help qualified health professionals who want some more tools and resources to be able to effectively support clients who disclose emotional eating and binge eating disorder. Now I'm going to be using a couple of props while I go through these videos. The 4 Energies of Emotional Eating card deck is a card deck I developed out of our Eating Freely program. So they're very helpful if you do ever want to get those for yourself. But actually what you can do is download the free ebook, which is available in the description below. And in the book, you will find every card and the descriptor on the back of the card, and then a deeper meaning, and then you'll find reflective questions and actions that you can share with your clients. So that is completely free for all practitioners who are watching these videos. Please feel free to just download it from the link below. So without any further ado, let's get started on today's lesson. Hi everybody, so today's video is actually about the complex area of forgiveness when it comes to emotional eating and binge eating disorder and talking about past trauma. So you can see on the cards that we're talking about holding on to anger and withholding forgiveness, which impacts the client far more than it impacts the person that they are hoping to or expecting to get that forgiveness from. And the message on the card is, in order to heal, the person suffering often doesn't need the other person actually to acknowledge their actions and apologise. Actually, the real freedom comes from the person themselves letting go of the need for that acknowledgement, because withholding forgiveness keeps the client in a victim position and prevents them from being able to move on with their life, okay? So this is the card that we are discussing, and if we go to the book, we can see the deeper meaning is discussing about trauma and adverse experience. So this is all about past trauma. This is all about things that happened in childhood or early adulthood. And so many of our clients with emotional eating and binge eating disorder did go through an adverse childhood experience or ACE or some kind of trauma. So when we look at the what does it mean, what I'm talking about is clients developing the self-soothing strategy of eating in response to stress or difficult events a long time ago. And as I say, that's the trauma or adverse experience. But now that the person is an adult and that situation has passed, the person is still stuck in a pattern of self-soothing with food. And this can be quite complicated for a couple of different reasons for you, the practitioner. Because the client may be eating and emotional eating and binge eating as a way of saying to the other person, look at me, look what you did to me. This is your fault. I'm like this because of you. And I suppose the energy around that, the unconscious energy, is until you acknowledge what you did to me, I can't stop doing this. I'm going to keep doing this until you pay attention and see what you did to me and apologize for what you did. So the client is maintaining the behaviour as a way of continuing to try and get that person's attention. And, they may never have had that person's full attention. They may never have been able to capture that person's love or respect or unconditional positive regard. Because maybe that parent was an alcoholic, maybe that parent was addicted to drugs, maybe that parent had a diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness. All of which mean that attachment was potentially insecure between the child and the adult, or that person simply wasn't available on an emotional level to that child. So even though that person now may be sober, maybe on medication, maybe, doing really well, they may not actually remember a lot of what happened in the past. They may not realise the true impact it's had on their family member, your client, and of course, they may never apologise for what they did. They may never fully acknowledge it, and they may never be able to fully acknowledge it in the way your client wants them to acknowledge it. And that's the piece that we as practitioners have to work through with clients to help them let go of the need for it to be acknowledged. Now, the other impact of trauma or adverse experience in childhood is that the person is subconsciously or unconsciously running a script or a belief that they are unlovable. Because again, as a child, if your mother doesn't love you, if your own mum or dad don't love you, you must be unlovable. So if the message was that you were being ignored, abandoned, neglected, internally a child is going to think, well, that's my fault because obviously I'm not lovable. My mum or dad are mean to me, or they're cruel to me, or, they hurt me. And that must mean that I am unlovable. So that's another energy that the client is carrying with them. And again, the work there is helping the client to realize that, of course, they are fully worthy and lovable exactly the way they are. And it's, you know, their mum or dad or whoever it was, primary caregiver, for whatever reason, was unable to show them that love, unable to form that attachment bond, unable to give them the emotional support or the emotional development that they needed as a child in order to grow into a fully functioning adult with good self-esteem and self-worth. Now, the third thing that I want to bring up here, and it's not it's not actually in the book for this card, but I just spoke at a conference recently in New Orleans, and it was for diabetes educators. And one of the very common complaints or issues in type 2 diabetes healthcare or bariatric healthcare, or any form, in fact, of higher weight related healthcare, is when the client is, as we would call it, non-compliant or isn't sticking to the plan. And the reason why clients would do this is because they are unconsciously recreating the conditions of their childhood, which can be neglect. So if a child was neglected, and then they grow up to be an adult, and even though they might have everything around them and they may have the ability to pay for therapy and they may have the ability to pay for medication and doctor's visits and, supplements or whatever, good food, whatever it is, but they still choose not to take the supplements, not to take the medication, not to go to their medical appointments, not to go to the dentist, not to feed themselves properly. And of course, when clients are emotion eating or binge eating, they're not feeding themselves properly. They are choosing to punish instead of nourish themselves with food. The more complicated reason underneath that is the client unconsciously neglecting themselves. And often this is done as a way of honouring the child that experienced the abuse, the neglect, the lack of love in their childhood. And the adult is continuing to perpetuate or recreate that scenario for themselves. Now, this is all unconscious, by the way, but it does take special skill to be able to unpick this and to be able to discuss it with clients. Now, I realise that a lot of practitioners who watch me on this channel would be nutritional therapists or health coaches. So you're not going to be able to work directly with trauma. But what you are able to do is work on helping a client develop their own sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And really what you have to do in this scenario is to slow the work right down. When you're doing lifestyle change and behaviour change, which is something that's very common for dietitians, nutritional therapists and health coaches to do, you really have to slow that work right down and really implement one tiny step at a time. So it may just be that you're working on encouraging the client to feed themselves breakfast in the morning. And it may not even be that they're cooking a breakfast or putting any, or, actually making anything, or, they could be just assembling a couple of ingredients and maybe buying particular ingredients and being able to feed themselves in the morning. And that could take quite a long time if there's underlying trauma. Now, the other thing I would say to nutritional therapists and health coaches in this scenario, if you realise that this is part of the problem and the client has disclosed that there was trauma in their background, to seek support from a practitioner who can actually help the client work with the trauma. And in some cases, it might be relevant and appropriate for the client to go to both of you at the same time, but usually it's more appropriate for somebody to maybe go and see a therapist first and do some work on the trauma, and then come back to you. If nothing is happening and nothing is changing, it may be that the trauma work actually needs to be done first. Normally what I say is actually with the Eating Freely program and how we work is we would work on the practicalities first, and then the client will be able to do the deeper trauma work later. But sometimes it actually is more appropriate for a client to see a therapist or a similar practitioner first and do that deeper trauma work first. And then they're going to be able to come back to you and be far better placed to do that lifestyle change and behaviour change work, because they will have discovered their own sense of self, their self-worth, and understand the importance of authentic self-care, which of course is something that I talk about all the time. Now, the action that I suggest in the book for this card is that the client writes a therapeutic letter to the other person in this situation. It must be a completely honest letter, no editing, no filtering, no nothing. The client needs to give themselves permission to fully say whatever they need to say to this person from their past, and using all of the language that they need to use and really pouring it all out onto the paper. Now, the reason why we do this as an exercise is the brain doesn't really differentiate between saying words to somebody and actually writing them down in a letter. Now, it does not work as well if somebody's typing it on a keyboard. They really need a pen and paper and to actually be writing, because there is a very important kinesthetic connection between the brain actually writing out words on a piece of paper and the eyes seeing the words going down on the paper, and the connection literally between the hand moving and the eye and the brain. So there's a very important, reinforcement loop that's happening in the brain when somebody actually writes something physically by hand. So it's a handwritten letter if at all possible, and allow them to completely pour everything out onto the paper. And then when they're finished, to put it away, maybe for a week or so, and they may want to come in and discuss it with you in session maybe before they get rid of it. They may want to bring it in. It can be very helpful for a client to bring the letter into the session and for you to read it to the client and then discuss how it sounds for them to hear it as if it was somebody else, because that is another key way for the client to get a little bit of perspective and distance from what happened, hear it as if it happened to another person, and see it in a completely different way. And it often lands in a different way when you do that with them. And then finally, when the client is ready, they may want to add something to the letter. They may want to finish it off a little bit, or, they may have forgotten to put something in, or they may have realised that they've kind of still filtered themselves as if the other person is going to read it, and to give them permission to be really fully honest. And then when they're fully finished with their letter, they burn it, they tear it up, they release it back, out into the ether and just let it go. And there really is a sense of freedom and release from that, because what they are releasing the other person from, or what they're releasing themselves from, I should say, is the need for the other person to physically stand in front of them and to say to them, I'm sorry for what I did to you. They are releasing themselves from the need for that acknowledgement or that forgiveness. And actually, they just give themselves permission to let go of it and to move on. And the other person can go off and do what they want. And that's no longer going to be as impactful for our client as it has been before they've done this work. So I really hope you found that helpful. And again, don't forget you can download the ebook for free in the links below. And again, as I always say, the cards are all in the book in their entirety, what's written on the card and the images, and then the deeper meanings, reflective questions for your client, and then an action for them to take. So you can do everything with your client with just the book. But of course, if you think you'd find the cards helpful, that's also something that you can purchase and use in sessions with clients as well. But for now, take care, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.